May the 6th, 2023, Westminster Abbey. The most watched ceremony on the planet. A woman in a white satin gown, a woman who had been called for 30 years the most hated woman in Britain, sits perfectly still as the Archbishop of Canterbury lifts a crown above her head. The choir swells, the Abbey holds its breath, and in that single, suspended moment, something that the British public had once declared utterly impossible becomes constitutional fact. Queen Camilla. The title her enemies swore would never come. The title the tabloids spent 2 decades insisting she did not deserve. The title represented the final, total, crushing vindication of a relationship that had broken a marriage, fractured a dynasty, and cast a long, dark shadow over a princess who died in a Paris tunnel in August 1997. It took 26 years. It cost more than anyone will ever fully calculate. But the crown came. And now sit with this, because this is the part that nobody is saying out loud less than 2 years after that coronation. Camilla's position inside the palace machinery is shakier than at any point since Charles took the throne. Not because of a scandal, not because of a catastrophic public relations failure, not because of anything she has said or done or failed to do, but because of something far more structural, far more cold, far more institutional than any of that. The man who gave her the crown is losing his grip on power, and the man who is quietly, methodically, room by room, taking that power for himself is a man whose mother Camilla helped destroy. That is where we are going tonight. And if you want the kind of forensic, unfiltered royal commentary that the mainstream press will not give you, then hit like, subscribe to this channel right now, and do not go anywhere. Because what follows is the full picture. And it is far more significant than anything you have read in the papers. To understand Camilla's current vulnerability, you need to strip away the ceremonial grandeur and look at the structural reality underneath it. Because the structural reality is this. Camilla's entire position in the British monarchy rests on a single, irreplaceable foundation. Charles. Not the institution, not the bloodline, not the constitutional framework which, notably, gives the consort of a reigning monarch significant ceremonial status, but almost no formal constitutional power of their own. Just Charles. One man, one relationship, one irreversible act of royal will that dragged Camilla from the margins of respectability into the very heart of the British state. Camilla became relevant to the British public because Charles loved her. She became tolerable to the institution because Charles insisted on it, repeatedly, publicly, at considerable political cost to himself. She became queen because Charles made it non-negotiable, first in the letters patent that granted her the title, then in the public declarations that preceded the coronation, and finally in the ceremony itself, where the Archbishop placed that crown on her head in front of a global audience of hundreds of millions. Her entire journey from the most despised woman in the country to the crowned Queen of England runs through one man. And that man is fighting cancer. This is the structural reality that no one inside the palace will articulate publicly, because to do so is to acknowledge something deeply uncomfortable. Camilla's power is borrowed power. It is borrowed from a king whose own grip on operational authority is weakening month by month. And when borrowed power loses its source, when the man who lent it can no longer fully guarantee it, the institution that received it begins, very quietly, to recalibrate. The British monarchy has navigated this territory before. Royal consorts throughout history have discovered, sometimes painfully, that the title, the palace, the staff, the deference, all of it exists in service of the institution, not in service of the individual who happens to occupy the consort's role at any given moment. When the sovereign weakens, or retreats, or dies, the consort does not inherit the sovereign's operational authority. The consort inherits the title. And in the modern monarchy, the title without the operational authority behind it is a beautiful, gilded, ultimately hollow thing. Camilla knows this. She has spent too many years inside this institution, watching it, navigating it, surviving it, not to understand exactly how the machinery works. The people around her know this, and sources close to her current household describe a woman who, beneath the composed, polished, carefully constructed public exterior she has worked so hard to build, is navigating a palace environment in 2024 and 2025 that feels fundamentally different from the one she entered when Charles was crowned. The question is, what does the freeze-out actually look like? Because it does not look like a confrontation. It does not look like a leaked briefing or a hostile newspaper story or a public argument on the steps of Westminster. It does not look dramatic at all. That is precisely what makes it so effective and so difficult to challenge. It looks like a calendar. Throughout 2024, as William's engagement schedule expanded dramatically into state-level meetings, constitutional functions, diplomatic receptions, the kind of engagements that signal genuine proximity to institutional power, Camilla's schedule did not expand in parallel. Her engagements remained, overwhelmingly, in the domestic charitable sphere. Literacy programs, which have been her signature cause since before the coronation, and are, to be absolutely clear, genuinely important work. Book clubs, women's health initiatives, the kind of work that generates warm local coverage and builds a quiet, respectable public identity, but not state work, not diplomatic work, not the constitutional level engagements that place you at the table where real decisions are being shaped. Now, to be precise about this, some of that is structural. The role of Queen Consort in the British constitutional system has always been primarily ceremonial and charitable. Camilla is not being formally denied a constitutional role she was ever explicitly promised. But the direction of travel is what matters here. And the direction of travel is what the courtiers are watching. In 2022 and into early 2023, Camilla's public profile carried the unmistakable energy of a woman who had arrived, who had won, who was, finally, after decades of waiting and fighting and enduring, being allowed to fully inhabit the role she had been denied. There was a confidence to her public appearances in that period, a settled quality that was entirely different from the careful, almost apologetic tone of her pre-coronation years. By late 2024, that energy has shifted. The settlement has given way to something more cautious. Sources describe a Camilla who is increasingly careful about which internal palace battles she engages in, who is mindful in a way that she was not in the early months of the reign of the limits of her influence in conversations where William's team is present, who understands, with the instincts of a woman who has survived more institutional warfare than almost anyone currently active in the royal household, that the landscape around her is changing in ways that her title alone cannot protect her from. There is, according to those same sources, a particular sensitivity around staffing, around whose people occupy which roles in the palace machinery. The question is implicit, never stated directly, too dangerous to put into words, of which household priorities take precedence when resources, access, and proximity to decision-making are at stake. These are not dramatic confrontations. They are the micro-politics of institutional life, played out in scheduling meetings and staffing reviews, and the careful, deniable language of palace correspondence. But micropolitics, accumulated over months, compounded over years, is how power actually moves inside closed institutions. It always has been. The British monarchy, for all its pageantry, operates on exactly the same principles as any other large, hierarchical organization facing a leadership transition. The people at the top change, the machinery beneath them shifts slowly, quietly, without announcement to align itself with whoever is coming next. And the question of who is coming next, inside the palace right now, is not in any serious doubt. William, Prince of Wales, 42 years old, fit, focused, strategically disciplined in a way that has surprised even some of his long-time critics inside the institution. A man who has spent the last 2 years quietly but unmistakably expanding the footprint of the Kensington Palace operation, absorbing responsibilities, building relationships with key constitutional figures, positioning himself not merely as heir, but as the working reality of where the monarchy is heading. The contrast with Camilla's trajectory is not accidental. It is the natural consequence of the gravitational pull that operates inside any organization approaching a succession. Senior figures, ambitious officials, long-serving courtiers do not wait for the transition to happen before they begin adjusting their alignments. They read the institutional weather, they make their calculations, and they move, carefully, toward the rising power rather than the fading one. This is not disloyalty in any dramatic sense. It is simply how institutions survive. It is how they have always survived. And the people who serve Camilla now, who have built their professional identities around her household, who have invested their careers in her operation, are not immune to this calculus. They see the same landscape everyone else sees. And the landscape is telling them something very clear about where the center of gravity is moving. Now let us address, directly and without evasion, the question that no senior courtier will discuss publicly, but that every single one of them has already gamed out in private. What happens to Camilla when Charles dies? In constitutional terms, the answer is technically straightforward. Camilla becomes Queen Dowager, the widow of the previous king. She retains her title. She will almost certainly retain a residence. Clarence House is the most likely candidate, the same house that served as the official residence of the late Queen Mother for decades after George VI died. She receives a financial provision from the sovereign grant, calculated according to the standard arrangements for senior members of the royal family. But here is what she will not retain: Buckingham Palace. The working machinery of the monarchy, the staff, the staterooms, the operational infrastructure, the daily rhythms of institutional power, transfers entirely and immediately to the new sovereign and their consort. William becomes king. Catherine becomes queen. Their household, their team, their staff, their vision of what the British monarchy should look like in the 21st century displaces everything that came before it. Not partially, not gradually, entirely. Camilla has watched this happen once already, from the other side of the transition. She was there in September 2022 when the late Queen died and Charles's operation moved in. She watched the previous household dissolve. She watched the staff changes happen, the priorities shift, the institutional focus realign with a speed that surprised even those who thought they understood how these transitions worked. She knows, with absolute and unambiguous clarity, that institutions do not carry forward the priorities of the previous reign out of sentiment. They carry forward what serves the next reign, nothing else. And here is the dimension that makes Camilla's position uniquely, historically difficult, in a way that distinguishes it from every other royal consort transition in the modern era. She is not William's ally. She is not his enemy, in any direct or operationally significant sense. William is too disciplined, too strategically focused, and too aware of the institutional optics to permit himself anything resembling an open conflict with the current queen consort. That kind of thing would be messy, damaging, and entirely inconsistent with the image of steady, mature, forward-looking leadership that he has spent years carefully constructing. But allies? No. The history between them is too complicated. The memory of Diana which William carries, visibly and permanently, as both a personal wound and a public identity, does not dissolve simply because constitutional necessity has required a functional working relationship between William and the woman his father chose. The years in which Charles's relationship with Camilla was the central, defining wound in William's experience of his own family, those years are not forgotten. They are managed. There is a significant difference. William will treat Camilla correctly when he is king. He will give her appropriate dignity, appropriate public acknowledgement, appropriate ceremonial consideration. He is far too sophisticated a political operator to do otherwise, and far too aware of how any visible coldness toward the Queen Dowager would play in the press and with the public. But the access to the informal influence, the proximity to the operational center of power that Camilla has built her late career identity around, the sense of finally being at the table where things are decided, rather than merely at the ceremonial display where things are announced, that ends, cleanly and completely. The moment Charles's reign ends, that world ends with it. And the people inside the palace who currently serve Camilla, who have oriented their professional lives around her household, who have worked to build her profile and protect her interests and advance her agenda within the institution, they know this. They have known it for some time, and they are making their calculations accordingly. Because in the palace, as in every institution facing a generational leadership transition, the courtiers who survive are the ones who start positioning for the next reign before the current one is finished. There is a particular kind of cruelty in Camilla's situation that requires no malice to produce. She did nothing institutionally wrong to arrive where she is now. She performed her role as queen consort with considerably more grace, more skill, and more public effectiveness than the vast majority of her critics ever believed she was capable of. The woman who was booed at race meetings in the early 2000s, who was described in poll after poll as the single most unpopular figure in the royal family, who was blamed by millions of people for years with genuine venom for the destruction of what the public had constructed as a fairy tale marriage. That woman transformed herself into a credible, working, genuinely respected queen consort. That is not nothing. That is, by almost any objective measure, a remarkable personal and professional achievement. She got the crown. And she is now discovering what every royal consort discovers, eventually, if they remain in the institution long enough and live through enough transitions to see the full cycle play out. The crown is not a guarantee. The title is not security. The institution gives, and the institution takes back, not out of cruelty or personal animus, but out of an absolute, centuries-old, non-negotiable prioritization of continuity and forward momentum over the interests of any individual, however powerful, however celebrated, however central to the previous chapter. The monarchy does not exist to reward the people who serve it. It uses the people who serve it. It uses their stories, their relationships, their dramas, and when those things have served their institutional purpose, it simply moves on, without ceremony, without sentiment, without a backward glance. And Camilla's story, her specific, extraordinary, deeply human story, has served a very significant institutional purpose. Think about what that story actually did for the monarchy. At a moment when the institution was under severe pressure, the Diana years, the public fury, the genuine constitutional questioning of whether this family had any legitimate future as the face of the British state, Charles's relationship with Camilla provided something the monarchy desperately needed. It provided a narrative of authenticity, of real love, however painfully obtained, of a king who was, beneath the protocol and the duty and the inherited weight of the crown, a human being capable of genuine feeling. That narrative helped rehabilitate Charles. It helped rehabilitate the institution. It gave the monarchy a story to tell about itself that was not entirely about obligation and tradition, but about something more recognizably, more relatably human. And now that rehabilitation is, in its essential work, complete, now that Charles is king, now that the coronation has happened, now that the institution has navigated the transition from the Elizabethan era to whatever comes next, the question that hangs, unspoken but unmistakable over Camilla's position, is precisely this. Was she a permanent part of the institution's future? Or was she the instrument through which the institution navigated a specific, difficult passage? And now that the passage is behind it, is she simply no longer needed in the same way? The monarchy has survived 800 years, not by being sentimental about the individuals inside it, but by being absolutely ruthless about its own continuity. The Queen's consort has come and gone. Favourites have risen and fallen. Men and women who believed themselves indispensable to the operation of the crown have discovered, sometimes gradually and sometimes with shocking speed, that the institution was perfectly capable of functioning without them. Camilla is not indispensable. No consort ever is. The constitutional role she occupies is, by design, supportive rather than foundational. When the sovereign who requires that support is no longer on the throne, the support structure reconfigures itself around the new sovereign and the old consort, however titled, however provided for, however respectfully managed, moves to the margins. What makes Camilla's situation so striking, so historically notable, and so worthy of the kind of careful, forensic attention that this channel brings to the royal family is the specific human dimension layered over the constitutional one. Because this is not merely a story about institutional mechanics. It is a story about a woman who waited nearly 3 decades for a crown, received it, and may now spend the years remaining to her watching the institution she fought so hard to enter build itself around a king who will never fully forget what her presence cost his mother. That is the reality beneath the ceremonial surface. That is the dynamic that the official portraits and the formal engagements and the carefully managed public appearances do not show you. And that is why, if you are serious about understanding how the British monarchy actually operates, not the version they present to the cameras, but the version that plays out in the scheduling decisions and the staffing alignments and the quiet, deniable repositioning of institutional loyalty, you need to be paying attention to exactly this kind of detail. William will be king. The transition, when it comes, will be managed with the practiced efficiency that the British state applies to these moments. The flags will be lowered and raised. The proclamations will be read. The accession council will meet. And somewhere in the middle of all that constitutional choreography, Camilla's world will change irrevocably. Not because anyone chose to be cruel to her, but because that is simply how the institution works. She will have the title. She will have the residence. She will have the dignity that the crown provides to its widowed consorts, because the crown is far too institutionally intelligent to create a public spectacle out of its treatment of an elderly Queen Dowager. But the room where it happens, to be the real room, the operational room, the room where the decisions about the monarchy's direction are made, and the relationships that shape the institution's future are built. That room will belong to William and Catherine, and Camilla will not be in it. The question I want to leave you with tonight, and I genuinely want your response to this, because it matters, and because this channel exists for exactly this kind of serious, unfiltered conversation about the institution, is this. Does Camilla deserve the legacy she fought so hard to build? Did she earn her place in the history of the British monarchy through the genuine skill and resilience she demonstrated across 30 years of extraordinary pressure? Or did the institution use her story and Charles's love to rehabilitate itself at a moment when it desperately needed a human narrative? And now that the rehabilitation is complete, now that the work her story was doing for the monarchy has been done, is she simply no longer necessary to the next chapter? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a genuine one. And the answer you give to it says something significant about how you understand power and institutions and the price that individuals pay when they choose to place their entire identity inside a structure that was never, in any serious sense, designed to protect them. Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one and I respond to more than you might expect. If this is the kind of commentary precise, forensic, and unwilling to accept the official version that you want more of, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell, because topics 9 and 10 are coming, and they go into territory that even the most dedicated royal watchers have not yet fully mapped. You do not want to miss what is coming next.